Okay, welcome back, class. The last two videos we looked at the New Wave and a bit about Jean-Luc Godard and how he came out of the New Wave. The second video we looked at existentialism and kind of set up that philosophy and its influence on this particular movie. And now, thirdly, we're going to look at, just real briefly, at pop art and Angela Dal Vecchi's attempt to connect pop art with the film this week, Parole de Fou, Pete the Madman. So notice over here, I decided to create a collage out of some Time magazines that I had there. As you look a little closer, you'll see we've got Johnny Depp here, Osama bin Laden. I think there's Kim Kardashian over here with some ice cream commercials. Newport Pleasures. I like that. I put right above here, right next to Osama, the word surprise. And up here at the top, what do we have? We Go for the Fans, A Life of Extremes. Anyways, I just threw together a bunch of pictures. There was really no thought behind it. But I was trying to create a collage, which is a sampling, a collection, a gathering together of multiple items that have no relation with each other, and yet trying to create something that that explains maybe a thought, an emotion, an idea. You might have even done this in grade school, junior high, high school. Your teacher said, love is the theme. Now here's a bunch of magazines and newspapers. Create a collage with the theme love or with the theme hate. And at its simplest form, what you do is you try to find images, words, and so forth, and assemble them in a way that evokes some sort of emotion, or at least in an abstract way tries to be to connect with an idea. So anyways, pop art and collage. This film here, the more I look at it, the more I think about it, and having read her chapter here on this idea, I can see a little bit more what she's saying about it being a collage. So let's first look, though, at pop art. I have posted a video online that I want you to watch in regards to pop art. It's just 10 minutes in length. And it goes into a little bit of detail about what the movement was and some of the key players. Now, some of you might have heard of Andy Warhol. He's probably most known for the quote that every person will have 15 minutes of have 15 minutes of being famous, and whether that's true or not. He coined that term, and it became quite popular. His pop art, we have seen it all over the place. You have seen it, I guarantee you, even if you don't know it. Just do a quick Google search for Andy Warhol. Do Google images, Andy Warhol, and you'll see his Campbell Soup painting, or maybe his painting of Marilyn Monroe. You could find several images there. But nonetheless, it was a movement coming out of the 50s, definitely becoming very popular in the 60s. And it's an idea that you don't have to just have high art to be considered a profound artist or to be a genius. That high and low art can merge together. There was also the idea behind it that popular art, that marketing, advertising, the art used in that could still be considered good art, or interesting art worth looking at. And as you watch the video, you can get a little bit of a better idea about the movement, or the thought behind the movement. And so out of that idea, what came the idea too of even comic books, or the style within comic books can have some sort of artistic expression. And if you grew up in the 80s like I did, I remember seeing these comic strips on girls' purses or on their shirts, and it would have, you know, the classic girl, love, what is it? I don't know. Anyways, love me, hate me. And it was an expression of this kind of pop art. Now, I mentioned comic books for an important reason, and I believe Dal Vecchi touches on it. What we see in this film before us is a collection, a collage of a series of moments. And so with each one of these series is something unique happening. You know, the car going into the river, them, or maybe it might have been the ocean, but actually them walking up a river, driving in the car. There are all these different segments, if you will, maybe different even series, almost like a weekly or a daily comic series. You know, if you open up the newspaper still today, you can find a frame and it would have maybe 3 or 4 different frames. If you're looking at Peanuts, it usually is 3 or 4 frames, and there's Lucy and Linus doing something, and then the next frame, something else happens, and in the last frame, there's the punchline or the kicker, some sort of a profound statement said there. Now, in the course of a week, you could take all of those little series and then cut them out and piece them together, and they might not flow as one narrative, you know, like a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end in the traditional sense. In some ways, I think we could look at Pierrot du Fou, Jean-Luc Godard's movie here this week, in that regards. There are a bunch of different series, there are a bunch of different segments that, as in a collage, are now assembled and put together, and as a whole, the story isn't a traditional beginning, middle, end narrative. They are pieced together, and then Jean-Luc Godard even goes a little bit further with this kind of pop art influence of throwing in a picture of Van Gogh, Van Gogh's cafe picture there, throwing in some other famous art, throwing in some advertisement or some neon signs that are just placed in there. Sometimes they do seem to be directly connected. Other times they don't. But if you look at this film from the collage perspective, you might be able to appreciate it a little bit more than if you were sitting down trying to watch, Bridesmaids here from the beginning, middle to the end, and it telling a complete story. Now, if we look at each of the parts, each of the particulars, as each individual segment, and then we back away from the overall film, we start to pick up a little bit of a theme here. Delvecchio does a better job than I'll even attempt to explain to you about the differences between men and women and the struggle of existence and what is life. She looks at color. She looks at framing, she goes at lighting and so forth, and what do these things mean, and she does a good job attempting to explain all of that. But there definitely is a pop art influence. So I want you to watch that video. I want you to read this chapter here so you have a better idea about this idea of pop art and how it doesn't necessarily make a whole in a normal narrative sort of sense, but it is definitely still trying to tell a story in a unique sort of experimental way. I like what Roger Ebert said. He goes, this is the kind of movie that at the beginning you might not like. In fact, he says, where is it here? Oh my goodness, I put the quote up here. Maybe I cut it off. But yeah, at the beginning he says, this is the kind of movie that you're at the beginning you're not really going to like. But he says this, it seems to be a gangster picture. Fernando leaves his wife and goes to live with his former girlfriend. It seems right off the bat, all of a sudden it seems like she's killed somebody. They go on the lam in the stolen car. They wind up playing Robinson Crusoe for a while, and then they go back to the mainland to face the music. But Godard never sticks closely enough to this plot to make it important. Excuse me. He does a curious thing. He will have a scene that is perfectly conventional, like a scene in a Hollywood gangster movie, but it doesn't come out of anything, or it doesn't lead anywhere. It is important because of its tone, its texture, and not because it's that it's advancing the plot. Thus, a Godard movie becomes a montage, a collage, of pure technique. The parts don't fit together, but they do add up to an overall attitude. Ebert, don't always agree with him, but I thought that was a good way of summing up this movie, and I hope it helps you as you watch it. It is a collage, but because it's from another culture and it's spoken in another language, it's difficult for us. In fact, sometimes it seems like nonsense. But I want to remind you, there are a lot of references here to American pop culture. We've got a Laurel and Hardy sequence here where they throw the hood of the car on top of the person and they get away and they do some, kind of a screwball comedy action there at the beginning when they're stealing or when they're taking off in the car. There's the reference to put a tiger in the tank. That's a direct reference to Mobil Gas. I believe Mobil was the one that had the tiger. Maybe it was Exxon. Anyways, whichever gas station had it. Hey, put a tiger in the tank. We've got Van Gogh. We've got Picasso. We have advertisements. We've got classical music going on in the background at certain times. Even the location that they go from Paris to the mythical south of France, the French Riviera. All of this works together and weaving American pop culture, French pop culture, putting it together in a way that is different. And yet, if you look at each segment, hopefully it's somewhat entertaining, or at least it evokes some sort of emotion. Or does it? Sometimes we can struggle with these things. It is existential in totality. The overall theme and subject of the movie is existential. It is struggling with what makes a man, what makes a woman, how should they live, how should they live together, should they live together, how is there harmony, is there such thing as harmony, is there such thing as love? It's asking these big questions. As you'll see, it ends somewhat nihilistically. It doesn't answer the question, and so we struggle with this. And even today, there are movies that are made like this. I don't know if any of you have seen the Coen brothers' recent movie, A Serious Man, or maybe even the one before, No Country for Old Men, which actually won Best Picture. Both those movies just end, and you're kind of left with, what? It's kind of like Red Desert. You want answers. You want it to wrap up for you, but it doesn't do it for you. And we kind of have to ask ourselves, why not? We're used to movies wrapping up for us. We want them to be at least packaged. Even if it's a tragedy, show us the tragedy. Give us the reason for the tragedy. He was an evil man. She was an adulterous woman. Or they just were lost and confused and, that's just life. But show us the ending that we can at least connect to, or at least see that there was an offer of redemption or some sort of redemption. I think the new wave, particularly Godard and other filmmakers, struggle with this because they realize that life isn't always perfect, and it doesn't give you, it doesn't wrap things up nicely for you. So I want to also offer a warning for those of you who are a little bit sensitive, and I don't mean that in any disparaging way. I'm cautious with what I watch. In about the 8-9 minute mark here, he's going to be at a party. This party really is the catalyst that thrusts him out. He's like, I don't want to deal with this because it's kind of a nonsensical party. People are just there and they're not doing anything with their existence. There's a moment, though, where there is a lady who is topless. Now, the lighting is kind of different, and it actually took me a moment to realize that was what my wife goes, she's topless. And I'm like, she is? And then I realized, yeah, she was. So I want to warn you about that. It's only for a few seconds on screen, maybe 10, 15 seconds at the most there. It's not in an overt sexual sort of way. It's just this party establishes Fernando's frustration with his life in Paris and with how the existence means nothing to him. And these people that he's surrounded with are nothings. They're not doing anything. And then a little bit later on, maybe about I can't remember the mark, it's maybe half an hour in or so, on the screen, you don't hear it in French because it's another word, but the F word is put up there. And so there are, a couple moments here to remind you that we're dealing with humans here. We're dealing with fallen human beings. And you might ask at times, why watch these movies? Now, I won't show you a movie that's pornographic. I don't believe that it would have anything to contribute to what we're doing. I would warn you on that. Even in overt gratuitous sex, I'm personally, as a Christian, cautious about that. I know my weaknesses, and I try to be very careful in that regards. Now, but why do we watch movies sometimes that have these existential or maybe even dark themes on it? And I recently wrote a student. I won't say who he or she was, but they know who they are. And I'm going to quote just a moment what I wrote to them because they were curious, particularly after Red Desert. How, as a Christian school, are we watching some of these movies that are dealing with some of these depraved things that humans are involved in? And the reality is that what we're looking at, what we're dealing with, is the sad reality that humanity is broken, that there is a depravity amongst humans. I would say even Godard, even Kierkegaard, people who might not, or Nietzsche per se, would not say that there's any necessarily God in control. They would at least say that humans are out of control at times. And as Christians, we struggle with two realities. And here they are. Man was created in the image of God, and man is fallen. Those are two realities that we face. And so at any given time, we can see beauty and depravity almost intertwined. They almost are like woven together. If any of you know Switchfoot, there's an album called the Beautiful Letdown. And there's this idea that there's beauty and then there's just a letdown. There's fallenness all around us. There's at times things that seem beautiful and then they turn and they're not beautiful anymore. And so this does not mean that we spend an endless amount of time observing depravity, but it does mean that we need to learn how to observe to these realities and learn how to respond to them in a God-honoring way. Red Desert, Pure du Fou, many of these existentialist movies are dealing with humanity. They're humanistic in nature, and they are trying to figure out this struggle. And there's some truly beautiful shots, truly beautiful moments in these movies. The way that the camera is framed, the way that the colors are set up, the way that the lighting is used, maybe even the way that dialogue is intertwined between two characters. We watch these things and we can see beauty in them. It's just like we can look at a painting of Picasso, right? We can look at a painting of Seurat or even Van Gogh. Some of these impressionistic as well as cubistic and surrealistic paintings, and we can see some beauty in there and go, wow, that took a lot of effort. I can't do that. I can't replicate that. And yet, in them, even at the core of their philosophy, we can understand that there's fragmentation, that they realize that humans are not what they could be or should be, that they are fallen, that they are broken. The directors here obviously see beauty in this world that we live in, but they also see the brokenness. And so they're trying to work through this. And so we see their struggle. We see their efforts in this world trying to find existence, trying to change their existence, trying to become better, and yet we see the failure in it. We see almost, if you will, the absurdity in trying to create meaning and purpose in an existence that has no meaning and purpose from an existential point of view there. And that's why at times you can see that these things lead you to a nihilistic point of view. I like Grant Horner, he's a professor at Master's College, and he wrote this really interesting book called Meaning at the Movies. He asked this question: should Christians watch movies that portray human nature so starkly or so negatively? Now, he's directly talking about the genre of film noir, and if you're not familiar with it, movies like Sunset Boulevard, Double Indemnity, and why am I blanking out? The famous Humphrey Bogart one, The Big Sleep. These kind of film noir, they're dealing with dark subjects: murder, adultery, lying, cheating, stealing. And they deal with these subjects, and he's asking why should we even consider these things? And I believe it translates to the movies that we are watching here. The truth about our own natures are suppressed in a great many works of narrative art, but not in film noir or these movies that we're watching here. I would go so far as to say that these movies are more biblically accurate about human nature than Hollywood has ever gotten close to. And what we mean by Hollywood is the classic ending that kind of wraps up, that sees good within humanity. While we wish to believe we are good, somehow we do not find and should not find a steady dose of people are basically good films, very appetizing. Hence the attraction of noir and these similar movies. But what about the heavy doses of cynicism that dominates the tone of these movies? Is that a good thing to sit and soak in on a regular basis? I would say no, and I would agree with him. But I say this for the same reason that I would tell you not to restrict the reading of Scripture to the book of Ecclesiastes, even though it is my favorite part of the Old Testament. I once spent an entire year teaching through it, about 50 straight Sundays, an hour each week. And he goes on and talks about the idea that Ecclesiastes deals with a lot of these subjects, a lot of these realities of the beauty of mankind, the created in the image of God, and yet the fallenness of mankind, the rebellion against God. As I have said, Hollywood, according to Solomon, and vice versa, is what we see here. Actually, that's not the quote I wanted to read there. If you find yourself in a world you cannot make sense of, and you desperately desire some ultimate meaning or purpose, and you choose to reject belief in God, there's only one place you can end up: the role of the cynic. And I think he sums that up really well for us here. These existentialists end up really being kind of cynics at some point. They're struggling, trying to find meaning, but ultimately they come to the point where they have to address that if there is no essence, if we are not created in the image of God, if we're not created with a purpose, then what is the point, honestly? And so when we look at these movies, we see a bit of true humanity. In that regards, we can even learn how to respond to humanity. Do we go, "You're stupid, you haven't got it figured out, I'm a Christian, I got it figured out"? I don't think so. I don't think anybody would respond that way. So as we watch these movies, as we look at the art that comes from a philosophy that is maybe against what we know is right, we're still dealing with reality, and we're learning how to deal with it in a God-honoring way that hopefully down the road, as we talk with people and we share Christ in our lives, and as we live our lives to the glory of God, we come off in a way of a real person, a real fallen, broken person who was saved by grace, and who, by the grace of God, is being restored back towards the original intent. We won't in this lifetime ever reach that. But one day the promise is that broken, fallen men will be restored and redeemed and put right the way that they once were. And so our hope is that we can talk, that we can have a conversation, and that we can have a dialogue with people who are struggling, who are lost in this world and in these sort of philosophies, and maybe even refer to some of these art pieces as a bridge to connect the reality of what is in the scriptures versus what we see in the world. So I'll step off my soapbox here. This kind of wraps up the overall lecture of everything. I'll give you one quick reminder that's my daughter Madeline there. She's 1.5. The term paper, I want you to start thinking about what movie you want to reflect upon. I put in there a little homework for you that next week I want you to turn in the movie idea and kind of the topic that you're going to develop. I'm not looking for an outline or anything, just a couple of sentences. This is the movie. This is the direction I think I'm going to go in that regard. And I know it's going to develop a little more, but I need you to kind of start to solidify in that. I'm going to give you 10 points out of the overall. I think it's 220 for the term paper for getting that turned in on time next week. So start thinking in that regard. If you have questions, concerns, you're lost, you're confused, please email me and I'll get back in touch with you. I check my email several times a day. If you email me and you haven't got a response, one person said I emailed you a while ago and I haven't heard anything. I check my email daily and I didn't see that one. I went back and checked and it wasn't there. So chances are sometimes things happen. So if you haven't heard from me within 24 hours, email me again because I'm going to get back to you within 24 hours to the best of my ability. Okay, so we'll leave it here, and all your work is now in week number 4, and God bless, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Take care.